Paul Bunyan's legend grew out of the oral traditions of 19th-century North American lumberjacks. Logging camp stories dating to 1885–1886 in northern Wisconsin are the earliest reliably dated mentions of Bunyan. These tales were improvised by veteran woodsmen to astonish and tease new recruits. Over the next decades, Bunyan stories spread through Great Lakes logging camps, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. There is no evidence Bunyan was a single real person. Folklore suggests the character may have been inspired by French-Canadian lumberjacks such as Fabian, Saginaw Joe, Fournier, died 1875, or by the mythical Franco-Canadian figure Paul Bunyan. In any case, Paul Bunyan emerged as a folk hero of the logging frontier long before he appeared in print. Paul Bunyan's tall tales depict him as a giant lumberjack of immense strength, embodying frontier might and humor. Early Wisconsin lore described him as a powerful giant, 7 feet tall and with a stride of 7 feet, whose call to dinner could shatter trees. Bunyan's exploits explain natural landmarks in legendary fashion. He cleared North Dakota of its forests and dug out Lake Superior, while dragging his axe across the continent to carve the Grand Canyon and the Mississippi River. Paul's most famous companion, Babe the Blue Ox, joined the mythos in the early 20th century. According to the Wisconsin Historical Society, the ox was only named Babe by an advertising executive when the tales were first printed. Babe shares in many tall tales, for example, breaking up log jams with tail swinging and even creating rivers by overturning a water wagon. Together, Paul and Babe epitomize the bigness, strength, and vitality of American tall tale folklore. Over time, their stories were embellished by storytellers and marketers. By the 1940s, folklorist Richard Dorson remarked that so many commercialized versions of Bunyan's tale existed that they had become fake lore. Paul Bunyan first appeared in print in the early 20th century, then exploded in popular media. In 1904 and 1906, newspapers, Duluth Evening News, Oscoda Press, briefly printed Bunyan anecdotes. Beginning in 1914, Minneapolis's Red River Lumber Company hired William Lawhead to use Paul Bunyan in its advertising. Lawhead produced illustrated pamphlets, e.g. introducing Mr. Paul Bunyan of Westwood, California, 1914–1922, that popularized the legend nationally. These booklets gave Bunyan his iconic plaid clothing and introduced new characters: Cooks Brimstone Bill and Big Joe, Accountant Johnny Inkslinger, and the Blue Ox Babe. Promotional reprints continued, notably The Marvelous Exploits of Paul Bunyan 1922, until some 100,000 pamphlets had been distributed. Major children's books followed. Poet Esther Shepherd, S. Paul Bunyan, 1924, and James Stephens, S. Paul Bunyan, 1925, gave the hero literary treatment, blending Northwood's folklore with new invention. These stories emphasized Paul's gargantuan size and humor, rather than realistic logging details. Tall tale elements also spread into music and stage. Bunyan appears in poems by Robert Frost and Carl Sandburg, and even an operetta by W. H. Auden and Benjamin Britten. In animation and film, Bunyan reached wider audiences. Walt Disney released a 1958 cartoon short, Paul Bunyan, narrated by Thurl Ravenscroft. And the legend was later featured in films like Tall Tale, The Unbelievable Adventures of Pecos Bill, 1995. Today, Paul Bunyan and Babe appear in countless media, from children's picture books and comics to logos and corporate mascots. For example, Disney continues to reference Bunyan in family-friendly content, and modern illustrators depict him in outdoor attire, e.g. flannel and red cap, reminiscent of his lumberjack roots. Paul Bunyan and Babe became enduring symbols of American folklore and identity, especially in logging regions. They exemplify the tall tale tradition of frontier humor. Bunyan's ingenuity in taming the wilderness resonated with lumberjacks and settlers. By the 1920s-30s, as commercial logging gave way to tourism, Bunyan was marketed as an icon of the heroic worker and pioneer spirit. Festivals from Maine to Oregon claimed him as a hometown legend. Governors and towns adopted his plaid clothing as regional garb. Large roadside statues, e.g. Bemidji, Achille, and Brainerd in Minnesota, were erected as tourist attractions and local landmarks. In fact, a 1937 concrete Bunyan statue in Bemidji became nationally famous. By the 1940s, Eastman Kodak named it the second most photographed American sculpture, after Mount Rushmore. Across the upper Midwest and Pacific Northwest, Paul and Babe appear on everything from restaurant menus to corporate logos. Their image also infused pop culture. For example, Minnesota held Paul Bunyan stamps and performed radio variety shows featuring him, turning folklore into civic pride. The Bunyan legend did have critics and complexities. It often glossed over Native American history and environmental costs of logging. Nevertheless, by mid-century, Paul Bunyan symbolized a nostalgic view of American industry and manhood. Folklorists note that after World War II, he embodied the American spirit, a hard-working everyman of superhuman scale. Even labor movements and environmental campaigns have invoked Bunyan imagery. During World War II, he was humorously sent to fight the Nazis, and modern conservation groups sometimes portray him as a woodsman who loved the forest. In short, Paul and Babe helped shape regional folklore, especially in the Great Lakes and Pacific states, and came to represent an idealized frontier identity in American culture. Today, Paul Bunyan and Babe enjoy a robust afterlife in tourism and popular culture. Their legacy is celebrated in festivals and community events. For instance, Bemidji's Winter Carnival, 1936-41, centered on Bunyan parades, and many towns hold Paul Bunyan Days, lumberjack competitions or fairs. Monuments abound. Dozens of large statues, often with Babe alongside, stand in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Maine, and even California, inviting selfies from visitors. Commercial tourist attractions also spring from the myth. The Trees of Mystery Park in California features a 49-foot Paul and 35-foot Babe at its entrance, and Minnesota's Paul Bunyan Land parks and logging museums draw families with rides and exhibits about the tall tale. In education, Bunyan stories are a staple of children's reading on American folklore, included in school curricula and children's anthologies of tall tales. Bunyan's influence even extends to environmental and cultural commentary. Outdoor brands still reference his flannel-clad image, and a July 28th, National Paul Bunyan Day, is observed in U.S. pop culture calendars. Some modern writers reimagine Bunyan's story to address contemporary themes, comparing him with fellow folklore hero John Henry. Others have pointed out the legend's darker context. For example, in Minnesota, the iconic Paul Bunyan statues were once spray-painted genocide as a protest of how folklore can erase Native histories. Nonetheless, the friendly giant remains a beloved American folk figure. Through books, mascots, monuments, and festivals, he continues to symbolize wilderness adventure, community heritage, and the grand humor of America's tall tales. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.